I'm going to go back on my preseason prediction because I thought USC would be better.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And as always, thanks so much for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube. My name is Zach Seyko. I am your host of the show. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. This is my preview of Penn State versus USC. You got a score prediction? Let me know down in the comments section. Be a part of the discussion. Penn State versus USC, this is an interesting one and one that I felt needed more diligence to get an actual prediction. So I'll give my prediction right out of the gate to start the show and then back it up with what I think are the most important details for this game. And I got to go back on what I said in the preseason. I said that Penn State would be 10-2. They would lose to USC, and I'm changing my prediction. I think Penn State wins this game 34-27 against USC. Now, don't get me wrong. I have pointed out that travel is going to be daunting. I thought this USC team would be a bit better, and they're not living up to the expectations that I had for them. Sure, these were close football games, and I think USC absolutely gives Penn State a fight, but Penn State is on a different tier compared to USC. So let's talk about Penn State's keys for victory here. First and foremost, you got to control the pace of the game the same way that Michigan and Minnesota did it. You can do that as a Penn State football team that is able to run the football, that is able to arguably run the football better, arguably better than Minnesota and Michigan. Penn State has Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen. You don't want to let USC's offense get hot, and you want to be able to impose that physical will, and Penn State has the advantage in the offensive line versus defensive line battle. Honestly, both trenches, both the offensive line and defensive line. I will get to the defensive line in just a moment, but Penn State's offensive line is better than USC's defensive line. Penn State's ground game should be able to control the pace, and USC's defense is just not good. They're better in pass defense, but run defense is just abysmal. They are averaging close to 5 yards per rush attempt, and that's barely top 100 for USC. So Penn State's ground game should be able to have a very successful day against the USC Trojans. But also, you want to be able to exploit USC's lack of depth, especially on defense. They're dealing with some injuries. They had some bumps and bruises coming out of that Minnesota game. It sounds, for USC's side of things, promising that the important players will return, but a guy like Bear Alexander, who opts out of the season, they had other injuries to the defensive front. If USC's players are available, but they're not 100%, you're already going in at a disadvantage when stopping the run, and then, your better players defending the run are not available. That's not going to be good news for the Trojans. Now to the defensive line. So that's the offensive line battle in the trenches. For Penn State's defense, you got to make Miller Moss's day a nightmare. This is another key to victory for Penn State. Penn State getting pressure on Miller Moss. Minnesota had a very good, effective game plan. And another part of this, too, is forcing turnovers. So if you get pressure on Miller Moss, you make him uncomfortable. He's definitely not Caleb Williams, not even close in terms of that star power playmaking ability. Do I think Miller Moss can make a lot of accurate throws? Do I think he studies the game as well as anybody else? Yes, but he doesn't have that ability to extend drives. When we talked to Kyle leading up at the beginning of this week on Monday, we had discussed, and he pointed out, hey, Miller Moss can't extend drives on his own. He needs to be helped out by his playmakers. He doesn't have that ability of Caleb Williams, and that was a really good takeaway from that. Miller Moss, if like Minnesota and like Michigan, they were able to get turnovers to capitalize and lead them to victory. That's another key for Penn State. Now, Minnesota's defense is built a little bit differently here. They have 12 interceptions as a team. I had to double check that. I thought that was a typo. I said, what? Somebody forget to split the 1 and the 2? No, they have 12 interceptions as a team. The next closest team total is 6. 6. They have double compared to the rest of the country. So that's Minnesota's defense, and Penn State has to play that Minnesota team. But it's the fact that, okay, Minnesota had to chew clock, run out the clock. Penn State's offense doesn't have to play the same way. They can dictate the terms and not basically play keep away from USC. But in that same breath, you play keep away from USC, you don't let that offense get into rhythm. And that's the point. It's disrupting the rhythm of what USC does well. And the most of the things that they do well come offensively. So let's talk about USC's keys to victory and why they make this a ball game, because I am giving them 27 points against Penn State. They are the best team that Penn State has faced this season. West Virginia, Bowling Green, Kent State. Illinois could make an argument for it. I still like this USC team. These were close losses on the road to unfamiliar opponents. They had to do that travel. But when you look at it, Michigan is not a fully complete team. They are a run-only team right now. And you see how that paid out for them against Washington. They lost that game. In Penn State's case, they have the complementary football. They have an offense that can help out the defense. They have a defense that can help out the offense here. But in USC's case, they are the best overall team. They have the best playmakers. They have a diverse set of playmakers. It's not like Illinois where it's, okay, you have a really good group of running backs and a couple of good wide receivers. USC has 4 or 5 different wide receivers that they could go to at any time, and I expect USC to turn up the tempo. That's another key to victory. Speed up this Penn State team. They are traveling to you. They are traveling to Los Angeles, the Coliseum. Look how that worked out for Wisconsin, a team that was up 21-10 at half, and then got shut out 28-0 in the second half. So USC knows what it's doing. Take advantage of that home field, that travel that Penn State has to go through. 6-hour flight. You got to get adjusted to the climate. This isn't the Rose Bowl anymore. This is smack dab in the middle of the season, and Penn State hasn't had that travel game yet. West Virginia is not far away. 3-hour bus ride, right? They didn't travel anywhere else. This is a big road trip for Penn State. This isn't just another road game. This is the big road trip, and there's really nothing to compare it to when West Virginia is just not that far away, and USC is more battle-tested in this case. A neutral site game against an LSU, traveling to Michigan, traveling to Minnesota. Again, I don't think USC is a bad team, but one of Penn State's biggest obstacles in this game is how you overcome that day of travel. How do you avoid a Wisconsin situation where they did not have enough gas in 4 quarters, but Wisconsin doesn't have the ground game that Penn State has to be able to keep your defense off of the field and make sure that they are as close to 100%, easier said than done, as close to 100% as they can get there. And there's added motivation. So that's another key to victory for USC. You're 3-2. You felt like you should be 5-0 and this should be a top 10 game. Added motivation, your back's against the wall, you're going to pull out all the stops. I can easily see USC breaking out some trick plays, putting things in the game that weren't on film to begin with, and Penn State's going to have to adjust on the fly. Let's go to the X factors for Penn State. It's the ground game, Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen, that dynamic duo. It is important that Singleton is as close to 100% as possible. I expect him to play. Again, this episode is going up on a Wednesday. Things are trending in the right direction from last week's intel to this week's intel, but having them both is key, and Quentin Martin got valuable snaps as well if he does need to see time. Penn State's pass rushing trio. Don't just look past Deni Dennis Sutton and Abdul Carter and think that there's nobody else involved in getting after Miller Moss. Zane Durant has been Penn State's best defender to this point. And that's easy for me to say, oh, well, you look at the box score, he's not leading in this and leading in that. You look at the analytics, and it's really not too close. The way that Zane Durant played, he is the difference maker. So go ahead and double Abdul Carter. Go ahead and double or chip Deni Dennis Sutton. You leave a one-on-one matchup in the interior with Zane Durant, and he will get after Miller Moss. Penn State's defense can force turnovers like a Michigan. Minnesota, again, on a different level. So I don't know about them, but that's an X factor too, that they can force turnovers with an Abdul Carter who's just an absolute disruptor, and you have a Zach Wheatley on the back end if Miller Moss is under pressure and just tries to throw it away to a trusty receiver. Boom, Wheatley's there. Drew Aller is also an X factor in this case. He has to prove why Penn State chose him as an offensive captain. You're a veteran. This is your first really true road test. I'm not saying that West Virginia wasn't a road game, right? You opened up the season on the road, but this is the big road test. You're a captain. You're a veteran now. No jitters. Nothing like Ohio State, because that's what this is, the turning point of the season. Ohio State was that last year. USC is that this season. Drew Aller has to stay calm, composed. He has showed that. Did I see elements of choppy feet, some overthrows, some questionable decision making against Illinois? Absolutely. But all the other times, Drew Aller's played some very good football that's going to get him drafted and going to get him drafted early. But he is an X factor. If he breaks down for whatever reason, that's gonna be bad news for Penn State. USC's X factors. I really like Zachariah Branch, and I've been told reliably that no, he's not even USC's best playmaker overall. I still like what Zachariah Branch can do, the explosiveness, that deep threat ability. Penn State's going to have to be aware of that, because I think Lincoln Riley will scheme up things that get Branch open, because Miller Moss is not going to have all day to sit back in the pocket. They're going to have to do things to be creative to get the football in Branch's hands. Same thing with Deuce Robinson. Deuce Robinson's just a matchup nightmare. So we talk about the speed of Zachariah Branch. That's a matchup nightmare. Deuce Robinson's size and athletic ability. He's a tight end playing wide receiver in the slot or wherever you need him to go. Deuce Robinson can do a lot of things and be a matchup nightmare for a Penn State defense that struggled against a Harold Fannin Jr. from Bowling Green. Deuce Robinson and Fannin Jr. is a veteran, but Robinson just being that big-bodied receiver that unless you're double cover, even if you are double covering him, he still could make plays. I'm surprised that USC doesn't use him in the offense more. Maybe this is a game where they turn to him a little more frequently. I also look to Woody Marks. I'm going to point out USC's offense quite a bit. They're going to need him in the passing game. If Abdul Carter and Denai Dennis Sutton are going to just go after Miller Moss, Woody Marks is going to be needed as a pass catcher. Screenplays are key. I don't know how effective he'll be on the ground, because Penn State's run defense is number 6 in the country in terms of yards per play. Woody Marks as a pass catcher might be an important safety valve, especially someone like a Lake McCree, who is not available for this game as that safety check down. Woody Marks becomes that much more important in this kind of game, and you can see that affected in the USC offense. And another X factor, just waiting for Penn State to travel to the Coliseum. You get to sit and let them come to you. They are coming into your house. USC's got to capitalize on that. And just to kind of rehash it all, USC's lost 2 conference, right? Expanded Big Ten. These are conference games against Michigan and Minnesota, 2 opponents that have similarities to Penn State. Penn State can play sound defense, force turnovers, and then use the run game so that the defense doesn't have to be on the field and then bend. Eventually you break. USC, I think, has gotten unlucky to an extent, but also you should not be in that situation against Minnesota. I liked Minnesota to make that game close. Heck, I even liked them to win it. And I'm not surprised that they upset a USC team. Travel has to do with that, but also the matchup. The matchup. So Penn State can do similar things to those teams and do them better, especially offensively. I do believe if the ball bounces a different way, maybe USC is 5-0 and maybe they're ranked in the top 10 and we really get a nice showdown here. They did beat LSU, an SEC team, on a neutral field, but Penn State, not comparable to LSU, comparable and better of what they can do with alike to Michigan and Minnesota. Hey, the Coliseum clearly plays into USC's favor. They dominated Wisconsin and Utah State. That's why I think this will be a ball game. Penn State, the people that are completely selling out on USC, that they won't make this a ball game, that it won't be competitive, that it won't be close. I just think Penn State does have enough of a gap. USC should have been better to this point. The losses are inexcusable. They shouldn't need lucky breaks against a Minnesota. They should have won that game, and they didn't. But I do like Penn State in this game now. I had this as a loss originally. Now I have this as a win. 34-27 is my final score prediction. We'll talk about the offense versus the defense specifically on each side for each team. That's coming up next here on Locked On Nittany Lions. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats. You can view live play-by-play and so much more. And it's all on the same page where you place your bets. It's that convenient, it's that simple, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's right, $200 in bonus bets when you place your first $5 bet. So you can turn $5 into 200 with those bonus bets, and it's guaranteed. That's over at FanDuel.com. And if you look at FanDuel, you can see the lines for Penn State versus USC. There is line movement back and forth. Well, it's settled right now in the middle of the week. Penn State is a minus 4.5 point favorite on the spread. Money line set at minus 194 with a total that's on the move, on the rise to 50.5. If you like those lines, you can bet them at FanDuel.com. Again, that is FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And today's show is also brought to you by Game Time. Game Time has just launched a new feature called Game Time Picks, and that makes getting tickets to your favorite live events even easier than before. Game Time Picks filters out all of the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste all of that time searching through thousands and thousands of tickets. Now, let's look at some Penn State football tickets against USC on Game Time. I have it pulled up in front of me. I have those Game Time picks up as well. You can get a super deal right now in section 101, row 22, if you are a Penn State fan and making the trip out there, or if you're a Penn State fan in the Los Angeles area, all in pricing, so no surprise fees at checkout, $118 per ticket. Then the deals keep coming in on Game Time. You want the lowest price for tickets to that Penn State USC game? $25 a piece. All in pricing for section 314, row 11. That's over at Game Time. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create that account. Use promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Let's look at some key matchups and understand the game plan for Penn State's offense first, and then Penn State's defense. So the Nittany Lions offense going up against USC's defense. One of the original thoughts that I had about this game, looking specifically to Wisconsin, because that's a Big Ten opponent going across the coast, and oh, look how that happened. That Penn State needs to build this buffer to avoid a USC surge, a USC comeback, and Penn State needs to light up the scoreboard and go quick. And that's not the case. Penn State doesn't need to go slow as molasses either. There's going to be ebbs and flows in this game, I think. And there's going to be, because there's so much at stake, a USC cannot afford a third loss. This is the Trojan season. The Trojan season is on the line. A 9-3 USC team, I don't know. I can't imagine that that's good enough to get them the 11 seed, because the G5 gets the 12 seed, the automatic qualifier. So you have to be in the top 11. I don't know that a 9-3 USC team gets you into the playoffs here. So Penn State can't do one or the other. They can't go super up tempo or in reverse and go really slow. And that's why I think Penn State just needs to lean on the ground game, because you're going to have explosive plays one way or another. Play action is going to set up things for you, but Penn State can do both. They can put together a 10, 12, 15 play drive. They're going to do it. They're going to have to do it to give the defense a break, because USC is going to try to speed them up. USC needs to get into a shootout with Penn State. They need to. They have to if they're going to win this game. It's certainly not going to be by a defensive struggle, and that's my overall point here, is that USC's defense cannot do enough, cannot force the turnovers, cannot force the defensive stands to a point where, okay, we can win a slugfest with Penn State. We can win a 20-17 game with a more dynamic offense, with a team that plays complementary football. No, we're going, as a USC team, we have to get into a shootout with them and try to outscore them. And if you're Penn State, you can't leave your defense you can't leave your defense out there to dry. You can't do it. For Penn State, your defense will get tired easily and then not be able to stop a USC offense that you do match up pretty well with. Running the 4-2-5, having the defensive ends and just the defensive line in general. Abdul Carter, Deni Dennis Sutton. Penn State's offense needs to be able to run the ball, sustain those drives, but also, like we saw against West Virginia, score in 20 seconds. They can do that, especially against this USC defense. Make sure Penn State's defense is as rested as it can be. Use the clock to your advantage. But I think just because of the explosive plays, you don't have to go all in to one side or the other. Penn State is going to be able to pick up chunk plays where it needs to, and that's just going to naturally lead to more points in that case. So you'll see it. Penn State will sustain those drives and then go really up tempo. And it'll be interesting to see that back and forth between an Andy Kotelnicki and a D'Anton Lynn, former Penn State guy. One of the key matchups here is Penn State's offensive line versus USC's defensive line. They have limited depth. They are banged up. Anthony Lucas had left that game against Minnesota, and he was one of the X factors in that game. Minnesota struggled. I mean, that was a 17-7 game going into the fourth quarter. Minnesota came from behind. Why? Because a key player like Anthony Lucas was not available against for USC's defense to make Minnesota's offense to wreck the game plan there. So you have limited depth because of injuries. You also have limited depth because players are choosing to opt out. Bear Alexander, former Georgia player, somebody that Penn State had an eye on in the transfer portal. We can see that this hasn't ultimately worked out here, so it's not Penn State's problem in this case. He's opted out. He didn't like that he wasn't getting enough playing time, but Alexander was a key contributor off the bench in that rotation. We've seen how important it is to have depth along the defensive line. Penn State has emphasized that for years. Now, it's not just recent under Deion Barnes. It has gone all the way back over the 11 years, the full 11 years of James Franklin's tenure. And now USC is seeing the issues when you don't have enough defensive line depth, what it can do. I look to Singleton and Allen against USC's run defense. USC, guess what? They also run a 4-2-5. So a Singleton and Allen and this offensive line going up against USC's defense that just doesn't have the best defensive line, doesn't have the best front seven. That could make again, a lot of scoring for Penn State's offense. Utilize that play action. I look to the kicking game as well. You make the switch to Ryan Barker so that you can get that reliability. And then in the passing game, so the talk has been all about, well, Penn State's just going to run the football all day, right? No, play action. It's going to help you set up the pass here. Liam Clifford has emerged. Julian Fleming has done things very well. Tyler Warren's the most complete tight end in college football. I could go on and on and on. Trey Wallace as the number one, and I will. Trey Wallace as the number one wide receiver for Penn State. Amari Evans is that deep threat. You can't just sell out for the run. Good luck trying to sell out for Singleton and Allen. Go ahead, Lynn, stack the box. Coach Lynn, stack the box and see what happens. You're going to get play action, and Tyler Warren's going to be open, or Trey Wallace, or a Liam Clifford. As we've seen, it's not just condensed to one or two playmakers, and that was my concern. Okay, so if Wallace and Tyler Warren are not able to get open, or a defense is able to scheme them out, who steps up? Well, now here's Amari Evans. Now here's a Liam Clifford. I mentioned all of the receivers. How about the running backs themselves? Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen out of the backfield. They have been lining up in the slot. They just haven't been asked to catch the football out of the backfield. Seldomly they have in checkdowns, but not on designed plays. And then Bo Prabula is taking catches. He's hauling in catches at practice. So even who is probably going to be a gadget player here in this game, we might see some special, unique plays with him. He can catch the football out of the backfield as well as the backup quarterback. Andy Kotelnicki can pull out all the stops in this case for this Penn State offense. So that other key matchup is Kotelnicki versus Lynn. On to Penn State's defense against USC's offense, and this one is key. Penn State's defense has not and Bowling Green, it was a struggle, but Penn State's defense has really been so much better in fixing those second half adjustments. If USC keeps it close in the first half, say it's something like 20-17, for example, at halftime, and it's close. Maybe USC is even leading. But Penn State's defense has been really good about making those second half adjustments there. But the first one I'm going to look to is going back to Abdul Carter and Denai Dennis Sutton in this case, and against left tackle Elijah Page and right tackle Mason Murphy. This is the biggest matchup to circle out of all of them. You want to say Drew Aller versus USC's defense, or Singleton and Allen against the run defense, anything else, the wide receivers against a secondary that is respectable for USC. I am looking to Abdul Carter and Denai Dennis Sutton against these two tackles. Carter and DDS have the utmost advantage, especially Carter. Let's talk about Elijah Page here. Elijah Page, great size, 6'7", 320 pounds, redshirt freshman, starting left tackle. Okay, you're well on your way, kid. Carter might be one of the fastest defensive ends in college football. I don't know if Page will be able to lay a hand on him. I don't know if he's going to be able to get a block on him. That will force USC to do a lot of different things. Get the football immediately out of Miller Moss's hands. Penn State's got to account for the short game, but that's where you maybe get creative with a Woody Marks and a Zachariah Branch. Those two guys are extremely important in this case. The short to intermediate quick throws that you can get from Miller Moss so that Abdul Carter does not entirely wreck your game plan. But if you are going to focus on that, if you're going to say, okay, we know our matchup is on the edge, we got to find a way to create a pocket. We'll use our backup tight end since McCree is not available. We'll use Woody Marks to chip. Okay, well then that keeps him out of the passing game. Then that also frees up Zane Durant and Devon J. Thomas. I have talked about Zane Durant at length, but Devon J. Thomas isn't far behind. Alonzo Ford had a really good game. Keziah Izzard, Hakeem Beamon. Penn State has defensive tackle after defensive tackle after defensive tackle, and I mean that. That's going to free them up for one-on-one matchups within the interior of a USC offensive line that, okay, they're better, but that's because the offensive tackles are such a liability. USC's offense is going to have to go for wide receivers and get creative. Find a way to get the football out without just getting the football out away from Miller Moss. For wide receivers, is Penn State prepared for this? I would like to think so because they have the depth with 6 reliable cornerbacks. The ones I expect to see the most: AJ Harris on a Jacoby Lane, Elliott Washington, and no particular order here, Elliott Washington, Jalen Kimber, and Cam Miller. Cam Miller playing more so in the slot, so that could be a matchup to watch, Cam Miller versus Zachariah Branch. Let's talk about that more in just a second. On the cornerback specifically, Zion Tracy has been seeing a lot more playing time as of late. Davian Collins as well. Those guys are not the immediate players that Penn State wants out there, but that's not bad depth. Those guys can make plays and step up when needed, but the first line of defense is going to be Harris and Kimber if we're talking about this in duos. Harris and Kimber, Washington and Miller, and then Tracy and Collins. That's Tracy and Collins. That's your third string. That's pretty good for Penn State's case. I'm going to go back to Deuce Robinson. Already mentioned him as an X factor early in the show. This could be a matchup problem. Somebody who is a tight end that can play wide receiver, 6'4", is able to just use that combination of size and athleticism. Penn State doesn't have anybody in the linebacker safety room that's comparable to him. I don't know. And the corner defensive back room, who is going to cover him? This is where KJ Winston matters, and him not being available for this game is a big deal for Penn State. And again, that's why I think USC keeps it close. You have to look at these individual matchups and say, okay, let's put some value, let's put some weight onto these. Deuce Robinson, what makes him such a mismatch is because of that athleticism and size. 4 catches, 36 yards, and a touchdown against Minnesota. I expect him to continue to see a more advanced role in this USC offense. Just naturally, he's still a young football player. He's getting used to college football. Now let's go to Miller versus Branch. Do you bracket Branch? Do you prevent the deep play? No, you don't have to, because USC's offensive line will not give them that time to set it up. Maybe you have some trickery here and there. I don't want to see Penn State fall for that, but don't expect Branch to just go over the top, because they don't need to worry about that in terms of quantity. You're not going to see that a lot because Miller Moss is going to have to get rid of the football. Watch for quick screens, jet sweeps, gadget plays, quick slants. Cam Miller's going to have to be really good if he's in one-on-one. Penn State likes to run a lot of man, a lot of cover 3. That means Cam Miller against Zachariah Branch. In a speed race, I'm taking Zachariah Branch for USC. Penn State's got to be ready to have a safety in a cover 1 situation or a linebacker ready in the hook and drop zone to see if Cam Miller gets beat to the inside. Just be careful because Branch does have that breakaway speed. Watch for AJ Harris on Jacoby Lane. I'm excited for that matchup. That's wide receiver number 1 versus cornerback number 1. The winner of this overall matchup, if it's really decisive, if it's 51-49, I don't know how much that will have an impact on the game. But AJ Harris versus Jacoby Lane, if that one's one-sided, that could actually really have a strong impact on the final result. Seriously, if Jacoby Lane, because AJ Harris is going to be asked to go up against Jacoby Lane for a majority of the game. And if Lane wins those matchups 7 out of 10 times, well, with no safety help, that could swing the game. But I like AJ Harris in that matchup. I think that's either 50-50 or maybe Lane might win, again, 51-49 type of thing. Miller Moss against Penn State's defense. We need to be aware that he is not Caleb Williams. Don't think of him as Caleb Williams. Obviously, nobody is. Nobody's going to. But I want to kind of take that misconception away that the quarterback play has taken a step back, even though I think Miller Moss is a great game manager. He doesn't routinely make a lot of mistakes, but if you get him under pressure, he doesn't have that game-changing ability that Caleb Williams had to extend drives, extend plays, just make these acrobatic type of throws. You don't have to spy him. You don't have to use an extra defender to account for him. You don't have to game plan for this ultra creative running ability, QB spy, nothing like that. Get him to turn the ball over. Those 2 interceptions, that pick 6 against Michigan, the 2 interceptions against Minnesota were the difference, and that's why I emphasize forcing turnovers. We'll finish with some relevant info, game info for anybody that stuck around this long. Thank you. This is a 3:30 Eastern Time kickoff on CBS and Paramount Plus, if you do have that. This spread has gone back and forth. Penn State was a touchdown favorite to open up in the season. It's at 4.5 per FanDuel. 5.5 in some other places. The Penn State money line is -194. The total has gone up actually to 50.5. And players just to keep an eye on. I won't say they're injured or I won't make any designations other than they're questionable. Just keep an eye on them. They're important. They haven't been playing or practicing to the fullest extent. Penn State's list includes a Nicholas Singleton. Okay, he was questionable going into UCLA. The same thing applies here, even though I expect him to play. Anthony Donko left after 9 snaps and was grabbing, I think it was his right arm, the starting right tackle for Penn State. He might not play in this game. I don't know how serious that injury was, but that's a starting right tackle. Nolan Rucci, that's why you bring him in the transfer portal. He can fill this role nicely if Donko has to miss against USC. KJ Winston, we know that he's out indefinitely. This is a big playmaker that Penn State wishes it had on defense. There's nothing to distinguish here. He's not playing against USC, even though we don't know the severity or what the injury actually is, just long term. Caden Saunders, I saw him on the Beaver Stadium football field post-game, and he was in a walking boot. So that doesn't really inspire a lot of confidence to say, okay, your starting punt returner, one of your key contributors at wide receiver is going to be available for USC. I hate to see it because Caden Saunders really has come along. He was supposed to be one of those breakout players for Penn State in this veteran role, and we won't get to see it because of the injury bug in this case. So hopefully Saunders can get well and get well soon, because Penn State's offense, you could need him down the stretch. When I look at USC's available players, just players that are questionable of note, Lake McCree, he is at least out indefinitely, but he's supposed to be back at some point in the season. Starting tight end, I think he's a really good playmaker, and it's affected USC's offense from being a machine. They could be better if they had their best tight end. Linebacker Eric Gentry did not play against Minnesota. There's also Anthony Lucas, who left the game early along the defensive line against Minnesota. And then guys who have shown up on the injury report as questionable: wide receiver Mekhi Lemon. Why USC can go for wide receivers? It's because of guys like Lemon. And then a key safety in USC's secondary, Achille Arnold. If these guys are not 100% unavailable, whatever the reason, I want Penn State and USC to be both at full strength, but that's not the case. But these players are the most important when you look at, hey, who could play, who's available, who's not available, and that can affect the outcome. That will affect the outcome of this game. That will do it for a long preview of Penn State versus USC. You got a prediction? Let me know down in the comments section. I have Penn State winning against USC 34-27. We'll still have more to come talking about Penn State versus USC. We'll have our weekly Locked On crossover episode with the host of Locked On USC and get some more insight. And we're going to get an analytical look with Pro Football Focus's Max Chadwick later on in the week as well, just to let you know what is on the horizon. I'd really appreciate it if you left a like on this episode, share it with friends and family, and if you're not already, become an everydayer. Subscribe to Locked On Nittany Lions on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts for the latest conversations around your favorite Penn State sports teams. And as always, thanks so much for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch every single day. For your second listen and watch, you got to check out Locked On Big Ten, the conference show, hosted by Craig Sheeman, talking about everything, all 18 teams in the Big Ten, not just Penn State, Ohio State, Michigan, but the newcomers in USC, UCLA, Oregon, Washington, Everything and anything Big Ten related is talked about on Locked On Big Ten. And it's available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.